It is a positive commandment to walk in the ways of the blessed God with all one's ability. And it says in Devarim, and you shall walk in his ways. Our sages of blessed memory learned that this commandment means, as the Holy One, blessed is he, is called gracious. Be you also gracious. Be you also compassionate. As the Holy One, blessed is he, is described as of kindly piety. Be you also of kindly piety. And so with all the qualities by which the Holy One, blessed is he, is described. A person needs to model himself after him and walk in his ways. So that's, and I think we've heard that before, to emulate Hashem as much as we can. It's not always easy. Okay, like giving tzedakah, being compassionate.
He's going to sorrow a bit.
This type of, but we've heard the Gavin, I'm sure you've also heard this before.
Yeah. So what you do is you go to Mount Sinai and try to see if you can replicate what Hashem did.
Yeah, Moses, you mean? Yeah.
Moses, Hashem, any of them.
I think Mount Sinai is actually in Iraq. Anyway, okay. Let me go weiter. I'll go weiter, Damon.
Yeah.
It is a positive precept to pray every day to the blessed God. For Scripture says, and him you shall serve. And through the oral traditions, our sages of blessed memory learned that this service means prayer. For Scripture states that to serve him with all your heart, what service is with your heart? And that is prayer. This commandment is that a person should relate the praises of the Holy One, blessed is he. After that, he should ask his needs, and after that, he is to give praise and thanks to the blessed God. It is necessary to pray with the focused attention of the heart. One should turn his heart away from every thought, and he should see himself as though standing before the Shekhinah. He should not produce his prayer like someone who's carrying a burden and throws it down and goes his way. Neither should he pray with a troubled and disturbed mind. Okay, so that's talking about kavanah and trying to just be focused and not get it over with ASAP, because it's when you're doing the Shemona Ezra, you have a direct connection, and just to try and switch off your thoughts you've been having throughout the day, or thoughts that are not, just to actually clear your mind. It's very difficult. It's a lifetime work, this. But and tefillah actually replaces, when the temple was standing, they had sacrifices, Shacharis, Mincha, and even in the evening. I think mainly in the afternoon. I don't know if they had many evening sacrifices, but so tefillah, as we know, Shacharis, Mincha, and Mariv replaced the sacrifices, because the temple isn't standing at the moment, and please God, it will be in the not too distant future. Amen. So this is what the our avodah is prayer. So it said in the previous halacha, we have to serve, emulate Hashem as much as we can, and this is now talking about prayer as in service. Avodah just actually for us and not for him, which is quite strange if you think of it. We're the ones that benefit from it.
Because it elevates us. It elevates us so that we can relate to him better. That's one of
and when you, I don't know if you guys, when you sometimes, it doesn't happen every day for me, but sometimes if you go to, I don't always go to a minyan. I go to a minyan, let's say 2-3 times a week, or twice a week at least, with Torah reading on Mondays and Thursdays. And mincha, I don't always go every day, but you feel lifted. You feel spiritually uplifted. It's a feeling you get. You can't explain it to people.
It's much better.
Because you've done something very positive, something spiritual.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You can do that at home as well.
You must try to get a good shul there in Israel that's got very, like tzaddikim at that shul, like this really decent people, because you get the merit of obviously the entire group. You want to make sure that God. There's Arthur going strong there, yeah? Arthur, don't look at the screen. Just you look at the road.
Just waiting for my wife. I'm waiting for her here. So she'll be in a minute or two. So carry on.
So
And
that's
I
just,
do agree, by the way. The one time I went to, I was feeling a bit out of it. Like it just like a regular day. And these guys called me over to fill up the million. And actually, after filling up the million and davening, I felt like different.
yeah.
Just like a different sensation comes over you.
Well, so during
And you're right.
lockdown,
Guys, I'm just going to refresh your memory quickly. If you can see with the screen share, just the Mishnah. If one puts out his processed straw, a whole straw, into the public domain to be converted into manure, and another person is damaged by them, the owner of the straw is liable to pay for his damage. All right, guys, that's the Tana Kamma, which means the anonymous first opinion. Then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, all those who create hazards in the public domain and cause damage are liable to pay. Okay. And whoever is first to take the hazardous objects acquires them. So the only thing that we can see is it seems that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the Tana Kamma is of the same opinion. So obviously the Tana Kamma is obviously a Tana. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, I don't know if he came later or he's also a Tana that agrees with him, but we'll just check, but they're of the same opinion. All right, let's get started. I'll tell you where we ended off yesterday. I'm not going to test you. I was going to test you guys, but since time is of the essence, that's not going to happen. So I'll tell you where we got to. We got to this discussion with Rav and Rav Zairi. Okay, so Rav said that basically, if you read the words of the Mishnah, whoever is first to take away the straw acquires it. So it's teaching here that the rabbis penalize one who puts hazardous materials in the public domain, and it allows anybody to take them. In other words, if you want to create a hazard, we're going to now say your articles that you left in the public domain in order to improve, you now don't have ownership of them, which means somebody else can take them, and that is trying to, as Gavin said quite correctly, discourage people from sticking their straw in the public domain to get trampled by horses and rain, etc., to turn into manure. So it seems that the general opinion, both with the rabbis and Amoraim, is that you do have this penalty of having something that you find precious declared ownerless. But what we're trying to see is what's the difference in terms of the extent of this penalty. So Rav said anyone can acquire both the materials themselves and the improvements. So what does this mean? It means if the straw is worth 1,000 rand, and if you leave it to get into a state of compost, it's going to be worth another 2,000 rand, so it's 3,000 rand in value. And by the time it becomes compost, anybody, say you as Rav Yehuda said, Rav Yehuda is of the opinion that you can leave it outside for 30 days. So just say somebody's going according to that opinion, you still don't have the right, Kevin, please, I need you to just be alert, is that you still don't have the right to let your articles damage in the public domain. So if on the 28th day, some other person, say I've got my straw there and it's turned to compost, and you wake up very early and you take it on the 28th day, it's yours. But according to Rav, you don't have to pay me for the straw or the compost it's become. So you don't have to even pay me the 1,000 rands worth that I originally paid for the straw, even though that the compost format is now worth 3,000 rand. And Rabbi Zairi says you can acquire the improvements, but not the materials themselves. So what does this mean? This means, Kevin, that if my straw was worth 1,000 rand, and now that it's decayed into compost, it's worth 3,000 rand. If you take and acquire the compost because it's ownerless, because that's the penalty I pay for leaving a hazard in the public domain, then you still have to pay me the 1,000 rands worth of the straw value, but not the extra 2,000 rand value it's accrued in terms of interest when it became manure. So I think those two opinions are very clear. Does anybody have any questions before we go into the details of this? It's very straightforward.
Yeah.
Good. All right, so the Gemara now explains the dispute. Over what point do they disagree? Rav maintains that the sages applied the penalty to the materials themselves on account of their improvements. So what does this mean? Is that the entire product, both the original value and the improvement, is rendered ownerless because part of the improvement was created illegally. Right. Now, Rav Zairi maintains the sages did not apply the penalty to the materials themselves on account of their improvement, meaning that only the improved portion you're entitled to keep, but the original part before it decayed, that value you have to pay back the owner, even though the improvement becomes ownerless. So the Gemara now challenges Rav's view from the final case of our Mishnah. We learned in a Mishnah, if one turns over dung in the public domain and another person was damaged by it, he, the one who was turning it over, is liable for his damage. Now, here we got a problem. Why? The Mishnah does not state whoever is first to take it acquires it. Okay, so what we're saying is, and I think I should share my screen so that you guys can see what I'm talking about, perhaps. All right, so there are two different parts to this Mishnah, guys. The first one is the straw, the processed straw and the whole straw. Processed straw is when it deteriorates and becomes manure, or it's animal fodder, in other words, it's partially processed, or whole straw is raw straw. Okay, that's the one aspect. The second aspect is this. What are we talking about here? If one turns over dung in the public domain and another person is damaged by it, he, the one who's turning it over, is liable to pay for the damage. Okay? So what we're saying is here is that this is a question on Rav. Because it doesn't say in the verse of the dung that you're entitled to acquire the dung. Now, you probably had the same question as mine. Who would want to? Who would want to? But we're assuming that you would want to, because dung is very much like straw in that it does create compost. Smelly compost, but nitrogen rich all the same. So we're saying, well, why in this case are you not allowed to take the dung? This is a question to Rav. It's not a problem to Rav Zairi. Okay? Why? Because according to Rav Zairi, this is understandable, because in his opinion, the penalty only applies to improvements. And dung doesn't improve. You can say that again. But according to Rav, it applies the penalty even to the materials themselves. Why does the Mishnah not say that one may take dung? In other words, the question is on Rav, not on Rav Zairi. So Rav Zairi says, listen, the only part that's ownerless is the improved portion. So if the straw is in its raw state, you can't take it. But because it has improved now, it now becomes ownerless. Why? Because the only reason you're leaving it in the public domain is so that it will improve. And therefore, if you make it founders keepers, once it has improved, who's going to leave their hazard in the public domain in order to improve? No one. So he said you're not entitled to take the capital amount, the actual amount of the material, only for the improvements. And you need to, if you take it in the public domain, pay the person back for that the straw portion. You just don't have to pay them for the improvement portion. And why is that a deterrent? Because picture this: if the straw is worth a fraction of the compost, everybody's going to claim it. So Rav's got a problem, because Rav's saying that you not only take the compost, but even if it hasn't deteriorated yet properly, you can still take the straw portion and not recompensate the person. Now it's become much more of a thing, Gavin, because if you leave your straw in the public domain and it's turning to compost, and say I owe you 1,000 Rand for the straw portion and not the extra 2,000 Rand for the difference in the compost, and I get to have a free gift, how long do you think your straw is going to stay there, or your compost, once it's deteriorated? 2 seconds flat, because now I don't have to pay you anything, not even the original material. Does that make sense? So it's more of a deterrent that Rav has. So the Gemara's got a problem, because it's saying, how does Rav explain this case, as far as the dung is concerned, that you're not allowed to take it. Because Rav Zairi would say you're not allowed to take it because dung doesn't improve. In other words, it doesn't improve to get to that state in the public domain. So thereby, it's not a deterrent where people would leave it there. So dung you can't take because there's no improvement process that takes place on dung. But Rav would say whether there's an improvement or not, you take the whole thing. So how does he explain that you can't take the dung? So this is the answer. So the one explanation is, according to Rav, the Tana mentioned this law in the first case of the Mishnah, which was the straw portion, and the same law applies in the final case, in other words, the dung as well. So this first place explanation of the Mishnah means that the Tana didn't have to repeat this law in reference to each case. It suffices for him to state it in connection with the first case and then understood that the same applies in the other cases as well. So according to this interpretation, if you want to take the dung for compost and you've created a hazard in the public domain, according to this interpretation of Rav would say you could take the dung, finders keepers. You threw it in the public, it created a hazard, it's ownerless. Because so therefore you lose it. So the reason he didn't mention it is because if it mentioned it in the first part of the Mishnah, it's obvious, according to this opinion, that Rav applies that law throughout that same Mishnah, both for the straw and the dung. Fine. All right, now we're going on to the next part, but the Brisa taught in reference to this Mishnah, this is the challenge. They are forbidden under the laws of theft, meaning that the dung is forbidden under the laws of theft. So this presumably refers to the case involving dung and teaches that one may not take the dung, hence the challenge to Rav is reinstated. Okay. But the Gemara now deflects the challenge by reinterpreting the Brisa. When the Brisa states they are forbidden under the law of theft, it's referring to the entire Mishnah. In other words, both to the case involving straw and the case involving dung. And it refers to the one who was first to take it and acquired it. That is, the Brisa teaches that it is forbidden to take straw or dung from the one who took it first. So what it's saying is this is the other deflection, is that when it says it's forbidden, it's not forbidden for the first person, finders keepers, to take the dung or the straw from the public domain because it's ownerless. According to the rabbis, they implied this penalty where if you took something that's of value to you in the public domain to improve and you created a hazard, you now lose it. To the extent of what, that's the discussion with Rav and Rav Zairi. So what we're saying is here is, say Arthur left his straw in the public domain or his dung there, and Gavin came to take it. What it's saying is Gavin can take it because he's the first to take it, but now Gavin owns it and no one can steal it from Gavin. Does that make sense, guys? Only one person can take it. Okay, good. Now that we've answered this, the Gemara is still persistent. It said, hang on a second, there's a Brisa that doesn't convey this explanation. For we learnt in a Brisa, if one put out his processed straw and his whole straw into the public domain to be converted to manure, and another person was damaged by them, he, the owner of the straw, is liable to pay for his damage. And whoever is first to take it acquires it, and it is permitted to take the straw under the laws of theft. But if one turns over dung in the public domain and another person is damaged by it, he, the one who is turning it over, is liable, and it is forbidden to take the dung under the law of theft. So this Brisa, as you can see, that we're doing now, explicitly distinguishes between straw and dung. So teaching that you can take the straw, but it's forbidden to take the dung. So in other words, it seems to contradict the view of Rav. Gavin, why does it contradict the view of Rav? Quickly.
Because Rav says you can't take. It doesn't matter if it's increased in value or not. You can take it.
Yeah, Yeah, well, basically, the Tana that explains Rav is saying the first part of the Mishnah and the second part allows you to take it, so you don't have to repeat it. So now it's saying that no, if you actually read the Brisa that's connected to this Mishnah, the Brisa is clear explaining the Mishnah that it will allow you to take the straw but not the dung. So how would this Tana, how would this person that explains Rav explain this explanation? Okay, so the Gemara resolves the difficulty. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, are you posing a challenge to Rav's ruling from the case of dung? Rav holds that in the case of something that is subject to improvement, the sages applied the penalty to the materials themselves on account of the improvements. But in the case of something that is not subject to improvement, they did not apply a penalty at all. So what are we saying? Is we're saying that why are you sticking it in the public domain? This is what the sages are saying, is that you're doing it in order to take your straw and increase the value into dung, into compost. But dung doesn't improve. So that penalty is only according to straw, which says it gives you the law to take it. But according to dung, there's never an improvement. Dung is dung. So therefore, you don't have a right to take it, because that penalty was only upon things that improve, to discourage people from putting it in the public domain. Okay, and this is the answer from Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who's explaining Rav. Right. So now, it's saying Rav would agree that the penalty does not apply. So the Gemara seeks to define Rav's ruling. Okay, guys, we're only going to be another 8 minutes. Okay, then you can go and hit Mincha, Gav.
Thank you so much.
All right. The Gemara seeks to define Rav's ruling. They asked, according to the opinion of the one, namely Rav, who says that the sages applied the penalty to the materials themselves on account of the improvements, do we apply the penalty immediately? In other words, even before any improvement occurs, or do we apply the penalty after improvement has occurred? So this is what we're saying, Gavin. This is the trick, is that we're saying, hang on. So you got straw in its raw state, right? Now, this penalty of it becoming ownerless, can Kevin take it at any time, like while it's still straw? And like he's still, because according to Rav, you now can take the item without paying for that actual material itself. Whereas Rav Zari says, hang on, you still have to pay for the straw. You only have to pay for you don't have to pay for the improvement that the straw becomes in the higher value. So now if you can take the straw, the question to Rav is, listen, whoever's going to see 1,000 rands worth of straw in the public domain is going to kidnap it. So at what point can you take it? Can you take it before there's been any decomposition? In other words, where the animals have trodden and starting to turn to compost, or do you have to wait for a certain period of decomposition? Does that make sense, guys? So do you have to wait only after the compost process has started? Okay.
Otherwise his concerns for theft.
Absolutely. In other words, it might not seem fair. So the Gemara attempts a proof. Come learn a proof from the fact that the Gemara above posed the case of dung as a challenge to Rav. Dung is something that does not improve. Thus, whoever posed the case of dung as a challenge to Rav evidently understood that Rav applies the penalty even to something that will never improve, like dung, and certainly to something that will improve but has not yet done so. So the Gemara rejects the proof. Now, do you think this proof is valid? When did we pose the case of dung as a challenge to Rav? We posed this challenge before Rav Nachman and he answered it. But after Rav Nachman answered it, can we challenge any more with regards to this case of the dung? So what we're saying is as follows. Listen, Rav Nachman answered it very, very clearly, is that anything that's subject to improvement, you can take, even the material itself, as well as the improvement. But if it's not going to improve, you can't take it like the dung. Rav Nachman answered it. The issue is here, by the way, is that when do you apply that confiscation? In the raw straw state, where the person just loses and you might say it's not fair because it hasn't begun to deteriorate, or you might say he can take the straw at that point because this person has created a hazard in order that his straw improves. So if your straw is open to be taken from day one, then it means how many people are going to start to create hazards in the public domain? Nobody. So we don't know the answer to this. Why? Because only the Rosh explains how we rule this in practice in Rashi, but it's not dealt with in this Gemara. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
All right, good. Guys, let's end off on this note. I know we are 16 minutes early today, but it's more important that Gavin goes to shul and I, rather than listening to me waffling on.
Damon, can you just go, Damon, you just do a 1 minute summary of what you just said over the last, let's say, if you can, whatever you can say that like for a minute before you go to Mincha.
All right.
In a nutshell, if you can.
All right. So what I was going to say in a nutshell is quickly, Rav said that you lose both the material and the improvement because if you put that in the public domain, you're not entitled to any of it back. You've created a hazard and people can be damaged by it. So now it's finders keepers. Rav Zairi said that if there's 1,000 rand of straw, he doesn't use this amount, but if there's like 1,000 rand of straw you left in the public domain, it will become 3,000 rands worth of compost. You have to pay the guy back for 1,000 rands worth of straw, but you can keep the 2,000 rands worth of compost. Then the next question was very, very clear, is what happens with the case of dung, where it says you're not allowed to take it in the brisa, and the case of straw where you can take it. So initially it said that in the Mishnah it wasn't specific. So the one person explained Rav, the one great rabbi explained Rav as saying that Rav doesn't discern between the beginning of the Mishnah or the end of the Mishnah because the rule is the same. If you can take it for the straw, you can take it for the dung. And then there's a brisa that contradicts this, that turns around and says, no, you can't take it for the dung. So Rav Nachman basically explained, Rav Nachman by Yitzchak turned around and said, no, as far as Rav is concerned, you're not allowed to take the dung because it's not subject to improvement. And since it's not going to improve, you're not entitled to just take it of your own volition. Then the discussion happened and said, at what point is there, Gavin, at what point is there deterioration and are you allowed to take it the minute after it's deteriorated or the minute the straw is in the public domain? And we're saying this issue hasn't been resolved because